chosen ones. There are moments when reality bends in your presence, when time slows and silence grows sacred. This was one of those moments. 12 shamans from across the earth had never met, yet each was summoned by the same dream. In their vision, they saw a being wrapped in blinding white fire, arriving not from the sky, but from the space between lifetimes. When you entered the sacred circle, their eyes widened, not in fear, but in recognition. One whispered, "You carry the frequency of the ancient ones." Another wept, not because of sorrow, but because they remembered your soul. You didn't speak, you didn't need to. Your aura said everything. The colors around you pulsed unnaturally. Blues from beyond our spectrum, golds that shimmered like liquid memory. One shaman said your energy was fragmented across dimensions and had only now returned whole. Another claimed your signature matched a soul that walked with kings during the fall of Atlantis. But here's the truth they all agreed on. This is not your first time here. They've read your aura like scripture. It carried the scent of fire temples, the sound of forgotten languages, and the tremble of planets long destroyed. One by one, they revealed visions. You as a warrior cloaked in feathers, another time as a child standing barefoot beneath twin moons, and another as a healer in a world where time never existed. But none of them could tell you why you've returned now. Only that your rebirth was not random. It was designed, chosen, timed with the alignment of something colossal. They placed their hands on you. One on the crown, one on the chest, one on the back of the neck. Together they chanted your true name, the one encoded in the soul, not spoken by man. You felt your skin vibrate, your mind split, not painfully, but as if another version of you had been waiting behind a wall you didn't know existed. And just before you collapsed into light, one final whisper from the oldest among them pierced the veil. You've been sent back to finish what you started. They didn't need to ask your name. The moment you walked past the threshold of the sacred space, the very air shifted. Candles flickered in synchronicity. The drums that had been echoing for hours fell silent. Even the wind paused at the edges of the mountains as if to listen. The 12 shamans sat motionless, not out of shock, but reverence. Your aura, they said, was loud, not in volume but in memory. They could see fragments around you, like shards of light suspended in motion. One reached toward it and pulled back instantly, whispering, "It burns with the age of 1,000 suns." What do you do when your soul remembers what your mind cannot? You weren't taught this in any school. There were no lessons on how to carry the burden of forgotten lifetimes. And yet, there it was. The way animals paused when you neared. The way children stared at you longer than was normal. The way the number 12 kept appearing, in dreams, on clocks, in moments. 12 strands of light in your field. 12 lifetimes overlapping. 12 points of origin that never truly closed. One shaman spoke of the way your energy touched the plants as you passed, the leaves curling slightly, the roots stirring. Another said you were the only person she had ever seen with a constantly shifting aura, never settling into one color or vibration, like you were trying to remember which self to be. Were you the healer, the warrior, the priest, the exile, or something far older that never had a name? They didn't try to explain you. They knew better, Instead, they observed. They placed ancient stones at your feet and watched how they pulsed when you stepped near. They held mirrors carved from obsidian and saw not your reflection, but your past lives staring back. A face from Mu, a mask from Kemet, a tear from Lemuria. One of the shamans, the eldest, motioned you forward and laid out an ancient parchment across the ground. It wasn't written in any known language, yet you could feel the meaning etched into its curves and glyphs. There was a figure drawn at the center, surrounded by 12 beams of light, a mark on their brow, eyes closed as if remembering a dream too vast to hold. She looked at you and said, "This is not prophecy. This is memory." And then she spoke the name no one else had dared to say that day. Yeshua. The room shifted. A warmth entered, subtle but undeniable. Not like heat from a fire, but like being watched by a presence that saw beyond form. She continued. He once told his disciples, "You will do greater things than these." He wasn't speaking to them alone. He was speaking to the ones who would return, the ones who had been here long before. Her hand hovered just above your chest, not touching, yet drawing something out. Your spirit matches his, not in identity, but in essence. There was no crown, no cross, no robes around you, just the weight of remembrance. You didn't ask to be compared to anything divine, but you also didn't flinch when the comparison was made, because something inside you already knew, not from ego, but from the ache that comes from knowing you've walked with the sacred before, that you've seen the veil thin, not once, but many times. The shaman explained how certain souls volunteer to return again and again, not to conquer, but to anchor, to be walking temples, to hold frequencies that keep the world from falling apart completely. And you, without even knowing, have been doing that in every life. A silent sentinel, a living archive, a bearer of the unspoken word. But why now? Why would a soul like yours need to awaken again during this collapsing cycle? The parchment trembled beneath you. The 12 beams of light began to glow faintly. Something was aligning, drawing down, converging. She looked to the sky and said, "He knew you'd return in a time like this." But she never finished the sentence, because just then, your aura began to shimmer again, and this time it was mirroring something unseen in the sky. They say energy doesn't lie. You didn't walk into that circle. You carried the weight of centuries into it. No one could see the lives behind your eyes, but they could feel them. Each time you inhaled, the air felt thicker. Each time you exhaled, something ancient rippled through the room. There were no visible wounds on your body, but your aura was filled with scar tissue, knotted signatures of pain, sacrifice, and transformation. The shamans didn't ask what had happened. They knew. They had seen it before, not in textbooks, but in dream states and smoke visions, when a soul returns carrying more than one lifetime's worth of grief. Your silence had weight, not emptiness, but saturation. There was too much to say, so you said nothing. One of the younger shamans broke protocol and touched your arm without permission. She gasped, pulled her hand back. "I saw a burning city," she whispered. "You were walking through it. Everyone else was running from the flames, but you stood still." Another one closed his eyes, and said he heard chants in a forgotten language, echoing inside you like the memory of a temple swallowed by time. Some souls carry light. Yours carries the full spectrum: light, shadow, and everything in between. The scars don't speak in words, but they emanate. There's one in the back of your field that feels like betrayal, another near your throat, like something sacred was once silenced, and near your spine, a deep imprint from when you were forced to bow, when you were meant to rise. But what no one could explain is how your scars seemed to glow, as if each wound had become a source of illumination. One shaman said, "It's as if your pain didn't destroy you, it upgraded you." And maybe that's what all this was. Not a punishment, not a curse, but a refinement. The scars weren't remnants of weakness. They were the evidence of what you survived and what you refused to let define you. Still, something in you remains locked. A door you've approached before in other lives, but never fully opened. It waits, pulsing behind the veil of your thoughts. They brought out the old drums, not the ceremonial ones. They had gone deeper into their archives for this. The ones carved during the time before. As their hands struck the skin, rhythms emerged that hadn't echoed in centuries. But your body responded instantly. Your breath slowed, your shoulders dropped, and your hands moved toward the ground, like they remembered something your mind hadn't caught up to yet. One shaman muttered, "The desert remembers you." You were shown an obsidian bowl filled with water, not for drinking, but for seeing. When you gazed into it, you didn't see your reflection. You saw sand, endless dunes, a figure walking alone, barefoot, robes torn, voice hoarse from preaching into the wind. No one around, no scrolls, no crown, just a presence that made the earth itself listen. The others called him a madman, a vagabond, but the wilderness knew better. The sun bent around him. The birds circled overhead. The sky cracked open each time he raised his arms. That figure was you. The elder shaman knelt beside you and whispered, "Yeshua once wandered the desert for 40 days, not to prove strength, but to remember truth. The wilderness has always been the forge of prophets." She dipped her finger into the water and stirred the vision. Another image surfaced, your feet bleeding, lips parched, yet your voice still echoing, not in anger, but in clarity, not for recognition, but because the message was not yours to keep. The others began to chant in a forgotten dialect, calling back memories not just from you, but from the sand itself. Symbols began to swirl in the water, circles, eyes, spirals, gates, and then a seal, one you had drawn in the dirt before, many lifetimes ago. A symbol that opened things, a symbol that closed things, a symbol you once wore not on your skin, but beneath it. They said prophets don't always come with names. Sometimes they return simply as echoes, carriers of frequencies that don't need to be translated, just felt, long before words were carved into stone or ink pressed to scroll. They spoke of a mark, a symbol that would return, not through bloodlines or nations, but through cycles. The ancients didn't believe time was linear. They believed it spiraled, folding into itself like breath into lungs. And at the peak of each collapse, a figure would appear, bearing the same frequency, the same light hidden beneath skin and bone. That mark, they said, doesn't belong to a culture or tribe. It belongs to time itself. It shows up when the earth begins to shake under the weight of its own forgetting. You weren't supposed to know this. The memory was sealed, but your aura betrayed you. The oldest among the shamans, the one who hadn't spoken until now, finally stood. His voice was thin, but his words carried a chill that rippled across the firelight. "This is your 7th return," he said. "You carry the echo of the first flame." They surrounded you again, not to trap, but to witness. Each shaman had once studied a different lineage: Mayan, Kemetian, Vedic, Druidic, and yet each of their ancestral scrolls, murals, and oral traditions spoke of the same being, always unnamed, always veiled, always marked. They showed you ancient sigils. One resembled the curvature of your spine. Another matched the shape of a scar behind your right shoulder. One you always assumed was from an accident. They weren't random. They were signposts. Glyphs etched into your body to remind you of what you've been and what you still are. One vision returned to you then. Not a dream, but a flash. You, standing at the edge of a forgotten continent as it crumbled into the sea. Not crying, not screaming, just watching. Because you'd already seen it before, and you knew it wasn't the end. What frightened the elders most was not that you returned, but that you returned now. Because the pattern had been broken. You came earlier this time. The cycle hadn't fully collapsed yet, which meant you didn't come to witness the fall. The fire crackled unnaturally as one of the shamans reached into the embers and retrieved a stone etched with an ancient spiral. It pulsed faintly in her palm, and when she handed it to you, the temperature shifted. Not hotter or colder, older. As you held it, something familiar stirred beneath your skin, like a memory that didn't come from this life or the one before. She stared into your eyes and said, "You were known before the known, seen before the seen." Another shaman stepped forward with a weathered scroll and carefully unraveled it. It held a passage written in multiple tongues, layered over each other, like voices from different ages speaking the same truth. He read aloud in a tongue few remember, but your soul recognized the phrase instantly. Before Abraham was, I am. The words rang out like a tuning fork through your bones. They weren't just about Yeshua, they were also about you. The others turned to you slowly, not out of worship, but out of wonder. Not because they believed you were the same as him, but because they had seen the pattern. Certain beings re-emerge at turning points. They don't return as kings or saviors, but as carriers of the eternal tone. You were one of them. Not to mimic Yeshua, but to fulfill what he hinted at. The continuation of the divine echo through time. The fire dimmed, yet shadows danced more wildly than before. One of the shamans threw herbs into the flame, and symbols began to rise in the smoke. Some from Aramaic, others from lost languages even they could not decipher. But you understood, not with the mind, but with the marrow. The symbols weren't telling a story. They were activating something. Layers of your soul began to open, like doors untouched for eons. Then came the silence again. Thick, pressurized, pregnant with memory. You felt something ancient watching, not from above, but from within. A presence older than time, whispering not in words, but in knowing. Yeshua's words were never meant to elevate himself, but to point to the mystery embedded in those like you, the ones who have no beginning, the ones who return not to be seen, but to reveal what others have forgotten. There was a night silence couldn't hold. The stars themselves blinked slower, as if observing. The shamans led you beyond the fire circle, through trees older than cities, where the ground pulsed like a heartbeat. You were taken to a stone altar, half buried beneath moss and thyme. None of them touched it. They only motioned for you to step forward. The moment your foot crossed the threshold, the wind changed direction. Something in the earth exhaled. The stone had no carvings, no language. It was pure memory. As you placed your hand upon it, your breath caught, your vision blurred, and then the images came, not like dreams, but like returns. A snake coiled around an ancient gate, a hand extended toward it. Your hand. You had been there, not once, many times. This was not your first encounter with the serpent. You remembered the voice, not a hiss, not a growl, but something smooth and manipulative. It didn't tempt with pleasure, but with knowledge, with power. It offered you maps of the stars, keys to dimensions, dominion over forces others could only pray to. But every time, something within you recoiled. Not out of fear, but recognition. The serpent was not evil. It was repetition. It wanted to trap you in cycles, to offer the illusion of mastery while quietly binding you to forgetfulness. The shamans watched as your body tensed. One began to hum, low and rhythmic, keeping you grounded as your spirit traveled. The others joined, forming a circle again, not to protect you, but to bear witness. You had escaped the serpent before, through fire, through sacrifice, through silence. In one life, you cut off your own tongue so truth couldn't be stolen from your voice. In another, you walked away from temples that bore your name, choosing exile over worship. But this time, the serpent is smarter. It no longer slithers. It codes. It embeds itself in thought, system, and frequency. And still, it fears you. Because every time it believes it has caught you, you slip through. Not by force, but by remembrance. Beneath the central altar, in a chamber none of the shamans had entered for decades, there lay a set of books, wrapped in cloth that had not decayed. They were not made of paper or parchment, but something smoother, darker, humming with an inner current. No one read these books with eyes. They were opened with presence. One by one, the shaman stepped back and allowed you to descend alone. You didn't ask why. You already knew what was calling. The chamber pulsed like a heartbeat. As you entered, the walls began to breathe, as if the stone remembered you. On a raised pedestal lay the first book, glowing faintly. When you placed your hand over it, a shimmer of heat spread across your spine. The pages unfolded, not with fingers, but with memory. And there he was, Yeshua, not as a distant figure on a cross, but as a radiant being beside you, walking through fields of gold dust under twilight skies. You were younger, cloaked, carrying something. He was silent, but his eyes held knowing. The book revealed fragments, not in sequence, but in resonance, In one vision, you stood behind him as he spoke to a crowd, but your eyes were on the heavens. In another, you both sat in silence beneath a tree that no longer exists in this world. No words, only understanding. He reached toward your chest and traced a shape over your heart. Not a cross, but a spiral. "You'll return," he said, not as command, but as prophecy. The book trembled. A second layer appeared, another life. You were different in form, but the soul was the same. The Nazarene returned, cloaked in mystery, his light undimmed, and again you stood beside him. This time not as a student, but as an echo, a parallel, a reminder. The chamber darkened, the book closed. It had shown you enough. Not to answer your questions, but to remind you what you've already known. That the divine doesn't work in one appearance or one time. It returns through echoes, through mirrors, through you. As you ascended from the chamber, the shamans said nothing. They only looked into your eyes. And they knew. They asked for your name, and you gave them silence, not as avoidance, but as reverence. Because names change, forms change, roles shift like winds across centuries, but presence remains. The shamans gathered once more, this time not to test or reveal, but to listen. You didn't speak in language. Your aura began to pulse, and every color told a story. Each hue was a lifetime, each flicker a role you'd embodied when the world called upon you. In one instant, they saw you in war, swordless yet feared, a protector of hidden cities long buried beneath desert sands. You walked through blood but never bathed in it, not because you couldn't, but because you chose restraint. In another, you were cloaked in robes of woven light, standing in a circle of the sick. Your hands moved slowly, channeling frequencies no machine could replicate. You healed with presence alone. You didn't chant. You didn't beg the divine. You became the conduit. They saw you once as the hunter, not of beasts, but of truth, tracking down fragments of forgotten wisdom across oceans and continents, chasing sigils carved into cliffs, buried under bone and dust. You followed the scent of prophecy, even when it led you into exile. You did not speak often, but when you did, leaders stepped down, and kings paused to listen. But the vision that stayed longest was the one of you as witness, sitting still, watching the collapse, not interfering, not saving, just witnessing, as if your gaze itself recorded history beyond any scroll. They saw your tears, not from weakness, but from the unbearable knowing that this wasn't the first time you'd seen the fall, and it might not be the last. Each of these lives carved channels in your soul, and now they all flow through you at once. This is why your energy feels heavy to those around you. It's not burden, it's density, compressed time, stacked remembrance. The shamans didn't crown you, they didn't anoint you, they simply stepped aside, because now you stood at the center, not seeking meaning, but radiating it. The spiral had returned to its starting point. But just before the moment could settle, a shadow moved across the edge of the firelight. The fire flickered violently now, though no wind stirred. The shamans circled closer, not out of fear, but because they had seen this before. Not in this form, not in this lifetime, but in the rhythm of return. They didn't speak. They didn't move. They simply turned their gaze to you, as if waiting for you to remember what they already knew. The shadow that crept near was not an entity. It was a moment, a signal, the activation of an ancient convergence. And in that instant, the memory fell into place. Yeshua never said he would return as one. He spoke of the Spirit descending again, through those prepared, through those who could carry frequencies the world had long forgotten how to hold. "The kingdom is within you," he once said. Not a metaphor, a map, a blueprint hidden beneath skin, encoded in soul, timed to awaken at the edge of collapse, and you are one of those vessels. The oldest shaman stepped forward, holding a staff carved with a spiral and an eye. He placed it in your hand without words. The staff wasn't power, it was confirmation. That what had moved through him moves now through you, not as mimicry, not as worship, as continuation. You weren't sent to repeat his path. You were sent to complete your own, because his return wasn't meant to be literal. It was designed as a rhythm, a sacred wave, a signal carried forward through the lives of those who burned with the same eternal flame, a pattern disguised as prophecy, a return hidden in plain sight. And now the signs are everywhere. Rivers reversing, sun dimming, machines dreaming. The fabric of what we call reality is unraveling. But you knew this. You felt it since childhood. The sense that time wasn't holding right, that something ancient had been watching through your eyes, that the moment would come when everything that had once been myth would demand to be remembered as truth. The shamans stepped back again, not to protect themselves, but to make space. The air thickened. The stars above you seemed to shift position. The ground hummed beneath your feet.
If you have come this far, it is crucial that you watch this next video here. But be warned, it is not for the faint of heart, for only the true chosen ones can handle this video. If you would like to also donate to help keep the channel going, our Buy Me a Coffee link will be in the description.